Hollywood in its golden age was a factory of dreams, and nowhere was that illusion more carefully crafted than in the love lives of its leading men. The studios understood that romance sold tickets. So they orchestrated relationships, arranged dates for photographers, and paired their stars like chess pieces on a board of publicity. Clark Gable with Joan Crawford, Tyrone Power with Janet Gaynor. The public devoured it all, believing every carefully staged kiss was destiny written in stardust. But behind the flashing bulbs and the studio-approved romances, a quieter truth was unfolding. Some of Hollywood's most beloved stars were falling deeply, irrevocably in love with women the cameras never found. Secretaries, nurses, teachers, socialites from small towns who had no interest in premieres or fan magazines. Women who cooked dinner, rode horses, raised children, and asked nothing of fame except that it leave them alone. The studios hated it. A married star was a star taken off the market, a fantasy made flesh, a dream made disappointingly real. So they hid the wives, minimized the marriages, and kept the leading men looking available for as long as possible. But love, as it turns out, doesn't care much for box office strategy. These men chose authenticity over image, companionship over conquest, and in doing so, they revealed something Hollywood rarely showed: the human being beneath the marquee name. Tonight, we look at 14 Golden Age legends who turned their backs on Hollywood's scripted romances and married the women no one ever expected. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper, the strong and silent archetype of American masculinity, had his pick of Hollywood's most glamorous women. But on December 15, 1933, in a quiet New York ceremony, he married Veronica Balfe, a woman the studios barely knew how to explain. Rocky, as she was known, was a Manhattan socialite and champion equestrian, the kind of woman who preferred stable yards to sound stages. She was connected to Hollywood only tangentially, as the niece of art director Cedric Gibbons' wife, but she had no interest in acting, and even less in being photographed. They met at a society event while Cooper was on leave from Paramount, and he was immediately drawn to her groundedness. She didn't fawn. She didn't perform. She simply was. They married quickly, and though Cooper's on-set affairs would later test the union, Rocky never left. She raised their daughter Maria, managed the Santa Barbara ranch, and volunteered quietly for charity. She refused premieres, avoided interviews, and lived her life on horseback and in gardens. When Cooper died in 1961, Rocky was there, not as the Hollywood wife, but as the woman who had known him when the cameras stopped. In a town built on illusion, she had been his most enduring reality. James Stewart. James Stewart, America's everyman, was 41 and still a bachelor when he met Gloria Hattrick McLean at a dinner party in 1949. It was arranged by Gary Cooper's wife, and from the moment Stewart saw Gloria, he knew his life was about to change. She was a former model and socialite, a divorced mother of 2 boys, and she had absolutely no interest in becoming a movie star. She had already lived a full life outside of Hollywood, and she wasn't looking to trade it for flashbulbs. They married on August 9, 1949, at Beverly Hills Presbyterian Church, and the marriage lasted 45 years, until her death in 1994. Together, they had twin daughters, Judy and Kelly, and Gloria quietly managed Stewart's finances, his charity work, and his home life with the same grace she brought to everything else. Stewart called marrying her the best decision of my life, and those who knew them agreed. She never sought the spotlight, never played the Hollywood wife, never made a scene at a premiere. Instead, she gave him something more valuable than fame, a life that felt real. In a career filled with unforgettable performances, Stewart's greatest role was the one he played off-screen, as Gloria's husband, devoted and grateful until the end. Clark Gable. After Carole Lombard's death in 1942, Clark Gable was a man hollowed out by grief. He enlisted, he drank, he worked, but nothing filled the space she left. Then, more than a decade later, at a Los Angeles party, he met Kay Williams, a former model and the widow of Sugar heir Adolph Spreckles II. She was social, yes, but not Hollywood social. She had lived in California her whole life, raised her children quietly, and had no interest in acting or being adored by strangers. They married on July 11, 1955, in a private ceremony, and Kay gave Gable something he desperately needed: companionship without performance. She managed his household, traveled with him privately, and asked nothing of him but his presence. It was a late-life marriage, gentle and undemanding, and when Gable died suddenly in 1960, just after finishing The Misfits, Kay inherited much of his estate. She was pregnant with his only biological son at the time, a child Gable never met. Hollywood remembered Gable as the king, but Kay remembered him as a man who liked to fish, who laughed at bad jokes, and who had finally, after years of performance, found a little peace. She gave him that. It was enough. Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda married Frances Ford Seymour on September 16, 1936, and the union seemed, at first, like a perfect match. Frances was Canadian-born, refined, a philanthropist from old money who had been previously married to a wealthy industrialist. She moved in cultured circles, supported social causes, and had no interest whatsoever in the Hollywood machine. She and Fonda met through mutual friends in New York's theater world, and they fell into an easy, intellectual companionship. They had 2 children together, Jane, born in 1937, and Peter, born in 1940, and Frances devoted herself to raising them while supporting Fonda's career from a distance. She avoided publicity, declined interviews, and preferred charity work to cocktail parties. But beneath the surface, she struggled with depression and anxiety, conditions that the era barely understood and rarely treated with compassion. In 1950, while Fonda was filming, Frances took her own life in a sanitarium. The tragedy devastated the family and cast a long shadow over Fonda's later years. But in the time they had together, Frances gave Fonda something rare, a partner who valued substance over spectacle, who built a home far from the cameras, and who loved him not as a star, but as a man. That love, however fragile, was achingly real. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy married Louise Treadwell on September 10, 1923, long before Hollywood knew his name. Louise was a teacher and stage actress, sharp-minded and compassionate, and when their son John was born hearing impaired, she left acting entirely to devote herself to his care. She co-founded the John Tracy Clinic, a pioneering institution for deaf children, and became a nationally recognized advocate for speech therapy and early childhood education. Tracy, meanwhile, became one of Hollywood's most celebrated actors and one of its most troubled. His decades-long affair with Katharine Hepburn was an open secret, and he and Louise lived separately for much of their marriage. But they never divorced. Louise refused not out of bitterness, but out of loyalty to the man she had married and the faith they shared. She stayed in Los Angeles, running her clinic, raising their children, and maintaining a quiet dignity that Hollywood never quite understood. When Tracy died in 1967, it was Louise, not Hepburn, who arranged his funeral. She had spent 44 years married to a man who had, in many ways, left her long ago. But she had also built a life of meaning, purpose, and service, a life that didn't need Hollywood's approval. In a town obsessed with image, Louise Treadwell Tracy lived for something deeper. That, perhaps, was her greatest performance of all. Cary Grant. Cary Grant married 5 times, but his longest and most peaceful union came late in life, when he wed Barbara Harris on April 11, 1981. She was 47 years his junior, hotel public relations executive who had never been in front of a camera and had no desired start. They met when Grant, semi-retired and weary of the Hollywood circus, stayed at a Beverly Hills hotel where Barbara worked. She treated him like a man, not a legend, and that made all the difference. Their marriage lasted 5 years until Grant's death in 1986, and by all accounts, it was the happiest chapter of his complicated life. Barbara managed his estate with intelligence and care, and after his passing, she quietly remarried a British businessman and stepped even further from the spotlight. She had never wanted fame, and Grant had loved her for it. In a career spent playing suave, untouchable men, Grant had always seemed just out of reach, even to himself. But with Barbara, he found something he had spent decades chasing: simplicity. No scripts, no costumes, no audience. Just a woman who saw him clearly and loved him anyway. For a man who had spent his life performing, that was the rarest gift of all. Humphrey Bogart. Before Lauren Bacall, before the legendary romance that defined his later years, Humphrey Bogart was married to Mayo Method, a Portland-born stage actress who had enjoyed moderate success but never became a household name. They married on August 21, 1938, and the press quickly dubbed them the Battling Bogarts for their stormy, alcohol-fueled fights. Mayo was fiery, jealous, and deeply insecure, and Bogart, never an easy man, matched her drink for drink and argument for argument. But beneath the chaos, there was something real. Mayo had left her stage career to marry Bogart, and she had loved him when he was still a character actor, still fighting for respect, still years away from Casablanca. She had believed in him before Hollywood did, and that mattered to Bogart, even when the marriage became unbearable. They divorced in 1945, and Mayo disappeared from public life, dying just 6 years later in obscurity. Hollywood remembers Bogart's love affair with Bacall as the great romance, and it was. But Mayo Method was the woman who loved him first, who married him when he was rough around the edges and far from stardom. She gave him loyalty when he had little to offer in return. That kind of love, messy and imperfect as it was, deserves to be remembered too. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn married Patrice Wymore on October 23, 1950, in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and it was one of the few decisions in his chaotic life that brought him lasting peace. Patrice was a Kansas farm girl who had made her way to Broadway as a chorus performer, but she had no illusions about Hollywood glamour. They met while filming Rocky Mountain, and Flynn, weary of scandal and excess, saw in her something grounding, a connection to simplicity he had long ago abandoned. When Flynn died suddenly in 1959, Patrice inherited his Jamaican ranch and chose to stay. She ran a farm, operated a small hospitality business, and lived modestly in the tropical countryside for the next 55 years until her death in 2014. She never returned to acting, never sought publicity, and never spoke ill of the man who had given her both love and chaos. Flynn's life was a carnival of self-destruction, but in Patrice, he found a woman who didn't need him to be larger than life. She let him be tired. She let him be human. And when Hollywood forgot him, she stayed in Jamaica, tending the land, remembering the man beneath the legend. John Wayne. John Wayne married Josephine Saenz on June 24, 1933, long before he became the Duke, before the cowboy hat, and the swagger and the legend. Josephine was the daughter of a Panamanian diplomat, raised Catholic and traditional, and she had no interest in Hollywood whatsoever. They met while Wayne was still a USC football player, anonymous and ambitious, and she fell in love with the man, not the myth he would become. They had 4 children together, and for the first decade of their marriage, Josephine tried to build a normal family life around Wayne's rising career. But as his fame grew, so did the distance between them. She didn't want to attend premieres, didn't want to be photographed, didn't want her children raised in the glare of Hollywood's spotlight. They divorced in 1945, but remained cordial, and Josephine spent the rest of her life far from the cameras, raising their children in quiet dignity. Wayne would marry twice more, but Josephine was the woman who had known him first, who had loved him before the world did. She had seen him uncertain, striving, and vulnerable, a version of John Wayne that Hollywood never knew. That, in the end, was her gift. She had the real man, not the icon. Paul Newman. Before Joanne Woodward, before the 50-year marriage that became Hollywood legend, Paul Newman was married to Jackie Witt, a small-town model and stage extra from Illinois who had met him in summer stock theater, before fame, before everything. They married on December 27, 1949, when Newman was still a struggling actor, still figuring out who he was, and they had 3 children together. But as Newman's career exploded, so did the marriage. He met Joanne Woodward on the set of The Long, Hot Summer in 1958, and the chemistry was undeniable. He and Jackie divorced that same year, and Newman would later admit it was one of the great regrets of his life. Not the divorce itself, but the way he had handled it, the people he had hurt, the promises he had broken. Jackie, for her part, disappeared from public life. She raised their children, remarried quietly, and never sought the spotlight. She had loved Newman when he was nobody, when the future was uncertain, and the dream was still just a dream. That kind of love, given freely before the world paid attention, is the rarest kind of all. Newman knew it, and he carried that knowledge quietly for the rest of his life. Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck met Véronique Passani in Paris in 1953 while promoting Roman Holiday. She was a French journalist assigned to interview him, and what began as a professional encounter quickly became something deeper. Véronique was elegant, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed by Hollywood celebrity. She had her own career, her own life, and she wasn't looking for a movie star, just a man worth knowing. They married on December 31, 1955, the day after Peck's divorce from his first wife was finalized, and the marriage lasted 48 years, until his death in 2003. Together they had 2 children, and they split their time between France and Los Angeles, building a life that honored both worlds. Véronique brought culture, curiosity, and groundedness to Peck's life, and he adored her for it. Hollywood expected Peck to marry another actress, someone who could match his on-screen intensity. Instead, he chose a woman who asked him questions, who challenged him, who saw through the performance. Véronique Passani gave Gregory Peck something no script ever could: a partnership built on respect, not fantasy. And in a career filled with noble heroes, that may have been his most heroic choice of all. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston married Lydia Clark on March 17, 1944, and the marriage lasted 64 years, until his death in 2008. They met at Northwestern University, where Lydia was studying photography and theater, and they fell in love before Hollywood had any claim on either of them. Lydia had talent. She could have pursued acting, but she chose instead to open a small photography studio and build a quiet family life in the Coldwater Canyon Hills. While Heston played Moses, Ben-Hur, and a dozen other larger-than-life heroes, Lydia stayed behind the camera, raising their children, managing the household, and giving Heston the stability he needed to disappear into his roles. She never sought fame, never competed for attention, and never resented the career that took him away for months at a time. She simply loved him, and that was enough. In interviews late in life, Heston would say that Lydia was his greatest blessing, the one constant in a career that had taken him everywhere and asked everything of him. She had been there from the beginning, when he was just a college kid with big dreams, and she stayed until the end. In a town where marriages rarely survive a single decade, theirs was a quiet miracle. William Holden. William Holden married Brenda Marshall on July 12, 1941, just as his career was beginning to ignite. Brenda had been a teacher before briefly acting under her birth name, Ardis Ankerson, but she had no interest in building a Hollywood career. She wanted a home, a family, and a life that didn't revolve around premieres and press junkets. Holden, still young and eager, promised her that life, and for many years, he kept his word. Brenda became his anchor during the war years, raising their children while Holden served in the Army Air Forces. When he returned and became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, the bridge on the River Kwai, Brenda stayed in the background, managing the household and avoiding the spotlight. They separated late in life, as Holden's drinking and restlessness took their toll, but they never divorced, and Brenda remained his legal wife until her death in 1992. Holden often said that Brenda had saved him, that she had given him a reason to stay grounded when Hollywood would have swallowed him whole. She never wanted credit for it, never asked for recognition. She just wanted to be his wife, nothing more. And for a man who spent his career playing cynics and loners, that quiet devotion was the closest thing to grace he ever found. Fred MacMurray. Fred MacMurray married Lillian Lamont on June 20, 1936, when he was still an up-and-coming actor at Paramount, and she was a nurse from Missouri with no interest in show business. Lillian had no desire to be photographed, no ambition to walk red carpets, and no patience for Hollywood gossip. She wanted a home, a family, and a husband who came back at the end of the day. MacMurray, ever practical, gave her exactly that. They adopted 2 children together, and Lillian devoted herself to raising them, while MacMurray became one of the studio system's most reliable leading men. He once described her as the home behind the man, and it wasn't empty sentiment. Lillian managed the household, kept the chaos of fame at bay, and gave MacMurray the kind of stability that allowed him to work steadily for decades without burning out. When Lillian died in 1953, MacMurray was devastated. He would remarry later to actress June Haver, who herself would leave Hollywood for a quieter life, but Lillian remained the woman who had built his foundation. She had loved him when he was nobody, and she had never asked him to be anything other than himself. In a career built on playing dependable everyman, MacMurray had lived that role best at home, with a woman who never needed him to perform. In the golden glow of the studio lights, these 14 men lived out the dream. They were leading men, heroes, icons, faces projected 30 feet high onto screens across the world. Their images were worshipped, their voices imitated, their lives mythologized by an industry that understood the power of illusion. Hollywood wanted them to be gods, and for a few hours at a time, in darkened theaters, they were. But off-screen, in the quiet spaces between premieres and press tours, they proved that the rarest treasure in Hollywood wasn't fame. It was finding someone real. Someone who didn't need them to be larger than life, who didn't ask for autographs at the breakfast table, who didn't care if the reviews were good or the box office was strong. These women, secretaries, nurses, socialites, teachers, journalists, offered something Hollywood never could: the freedom to be ordinary. The studios fought it, of course. They hid the wives, downplayed the marriages, and kept their stars looking available for as long as possible. But the men in this story chose authenticity anyway. They came home to women who knew their real names, who saw them tired and uncertain and human, and who loved them not despite it, but because of it. These marriages didn't make magazine covers. They didn't generate headlines. But they lasted, often for decades, sometimes for a lifetime, because they were built on something more enduring than publicity. Hollywood thrived on fantasy, but these men understood that fantasy only works for a few hours. The rest of life, the decades between the premieres, the mornings after the applause fades, the quiet moments when the cameras finally stop, require something different. It requires truth. It requires a partner who stays when the spotlight moves on. And these 14 stars, legends though they were, had the wisdom to know that the most important role they would ever play wasn't on screen. It was at home, with the women no one ever knew, the women who made them whole.